All right, welcome back to the Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Stephen Arena, aka Really Tan Man, as he's known on Twitter, who's the founder of Ancient Crunch, which produces masa tortilla chips, which sponsored our Cracks in Postmodernity zine party launch a couple of weeks ago. But
Nice.
Stephen, thanks so much for for coming on here.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So of course we want to know what's the backstory of Ancient Crunch? How did you come up with this idea? How did you launch the
Yeah.
company? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so the overall idea is to just gut America's standard junk food pantry of delicious crunchy things that are terrible for you and replace them with delicious crunchy things that are good for you. That's the overall goal. And this isn't some sort of like health food play where it's like, oh, the healthy version of blah blah blah, because the healthy version of blah 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 always like tastes like cardboard or kale or chia
Yes,
seeds or something,
for
and like
sure.
it's not fun, it's not cool, and no one wants that. Um, the fun fact though about food and more or less health in general, but the fun fact here is that when you make things the right way, like not only do they taste how they should, they also are healthy for you. And this is the sort of mind exploding revolutionary idea that's just like the most obvious thing ever, if you actually thought about it from first principles. But it's like really the whole revolutionary thing, as far as Americans and like health are concerned. Like people think that health food has to taste bad and that good tasting food must be bad for you, right? Talk to anyone. They're like, oh, this is so good. Like, how could this be healthy for me? Like, it's just like a cultural concept we have because we're so detached from our food and our food is like so synthetic and so fake that people forget like the purpose of it. And they forget that like every animal in nature walking around uses its taste buds as a guidepost for what's healthy, right? How is that? How can a lion, gazelles are tasty. How does a lion get that to work? But if we go and like eat tasty food, we're gonna like poison ourselves. How does that happen? Um, and the reason is because our taste buds evolved, to respond to an environment where food is natural. It naturally occurred over thousands of years. Our taste buds could calibrate to figure out, okay, that tastes good and that's good for me. Um, the problem is that when things are unnatural, uh, it hijacks the whole system. They're not set up to take like inputs that are foreign to the system. And so you get all these like weird signals, like all this weird noise basically in the taste bud system. And that's why things like Doritos taste good, even though they're not good for you. So yeah, our whole goal is to fix that by making the same broad recipes that everyone loves and that are like highly traditional and delicious. But just using only the natural ingredients so that they're not actually bad for you. That's the idea.
So let's get into the seed oil stuff because that's one of the big like selling
Yeah,
points of the tortilla chips. Like for people who don't know, for the unenlightened, like what
sure.
are seed oils and what's the big problem with them?
Yeah. So seed oils are also known as vegetable oils or cooking oil, are hyper processed, basically synthetic oils that were invented around 100 years ago and they have gone from 0% of calories in like 1900 to over 20% of American calories, like of all calories, not calories from fat, like all calories. It's like that. It's like the hidden thing that's in everywhere. And part of this is like seed oils don't really taste like much.
Yeah.
Um, that was actually one of their selling points in the 1950s. Like, hey, it doesn't taste like you don't taste it. Unlike butter or tallow, which do have a flavor that's delicious, but it is noticeable. Um, so you don't really notice them. They're not even considered to be food almost. Like, for example, there are these farm to table restaurants all over the place that are like, oh, all our meat is like locally sourced and our produce is seasonal and it's like from the farm and blah, blah, blah. And then if you ask them, they put like, if they have anything fried, it's like they have canola oil in the fryer. And it's like, dude, is like freaking canola oil from your farm? Like, of course not. But it's like it's this entire domain of cuisine that chefs and customers and whatever, they don't even like think of it as like part of the food thing. It's just like underlying, it's like hidden, it's just everywhere. Um, and so they're a problem because they're everywhere. And well, that's not necessarily a problem itself, but the fact that they're very bad for you is why this is a problem. Um, and it's funny that like none of the diet trends or health trends of the past, however many years, ever take them into account. Vegans, like you can eat seed oils. Keto, you can eat seed oils. Gluten free, you can eat seed oils. Um, any Whole 30 like paleo, Whole
Hmm.
30 like seed oils are Whole 30 approved. Like come on. So it's kind of like this thing that's behind the scenes operating in every single domain. And so they infect every place you end up going, right? If you're going to be healthy and you go to be vegan, hey, you have seed oils. If you're going to go be keto, hey, you got seed oils. Um, and that's like why they're sort of so insidious. As for what they do from a health perspective, most notably they make you fat because they mess with your body's hunger signaling system so that you eat like more calories of them compared to actual fats. They decrease your metabolic rate, which makes you even fatter because you burn fewer calories just by existing than you would if you didn't eat them. And they're also highly inflammatory. So whatever tissues they end up in your body, they like cause inflammation in, and that's just like destructive. So they're just not good for you. And I think the real punchline that's very the most compelling thing for me about this is like if you stop eating them, like the food that you eat is going to taste better. Like
Mhm.
it's not like gluten free where it's like, okay, people like bread is delicious. Like how could you, there's always whenever someone comes to you and they're like, oh, I have this diet, like I don't eat gluten. You like roll your eyes to them, right? Because like, dude, bread is good. Like what's wrong with you? But like no one's out here defending the taste quality of seed oils. Like there's
Yeah.
no world in which experientially you prefer them. You might eat them out of convenience, and maybe if you don't eat them that often or whatever, you're not as sensitive to it. Blah blah blah. Like you're gonna be fine. But there's no world in which you prefer to eat them, and that's why I think it's just such a more compelling like approach to food than any of these other things that like people have talked about in recent memory.
Yeah, so then let's get into the chips. So you're using beef tallow
Yeah,
to fry them, I presume, right?
correct.
So
That's
why
correct.
did you choose beef tallow? I mean, it's because it has a very particular flavor. I mean, it took me off guard at first, but then
Mhm.
it was delicious. And like at the
Yeah,
launch party, everybody was like, polishing them off. So like, yeah,
yeah.
why did you decide that?
So I after freshman year of college, I did a little study abroad thing in Belgium, like some internship over the summer. And in Belgium, they're very famous for the French fries.
Mhm.
So like Belgian fries, that's where they invented Belgian fries. And like if you go out, the drunk food that's like available at like 3 in the morning
Yeah.
is almost universally fries with like mayo. Um, in Canada, they have a similar sort of thing. They call it poutine, I think.
Yes. Which I'm
Uh,
obsessed with. Yeah.
yeah. So fries are everywhere. They're so good. And I forget how I learned this, but like while I was there, I just knew that I learned that they fried the fries in beef tallow.
Mhm.
Um, that was 10 years ago. Just like a little fact in the back of my head.
Yeah.
And then I learned at some point also that like tallow was used by McDonald's to fry their French fries up until the 90s.
Oh wow. I know
Yeah.
that.
And so that's like McDonald's French fries are really good, right? They spread across the country in the 20th century. Like one of the contributing factors is like they were famous for their fries, and their fries are delicious. Even today, they put like beef extract in the fries to sort of like
And what kind of oil are they frying them in now?
nowadays it's like soybean oil or some garbage,
Yeah.
but they still put beef extract to like give it that flavor. So uh those two pieces of information sort of were like the give it insight into the historical precedent for frying things in beef tallow. From a chemistry standpoint, beef tallow is like the most saturated fat that like is available to in Europe.
Mhm.
And so saturated fat is very good to fry in, and like there's this huge culinary tradition, and it tastes very good. Beef tallow is also very nutrient dense. So if you would compare it to something like coconut oil, like yeah, it doesn't have any unsaturated fats, like it's not a seed oil, but it also doesn't have any vitamins.
Mhm.
Like beef tallow has vitamin A and vitamin K and vitamin D and all this stuff because animals store their reserves of nutrients in
Mhm.
their body fat.
Interesting.
So when it came time to decide what fat to fry the chips in, it was like it was to me it was just obvious. Like you good frying happens with beef tallow. Like there's really no other option here. Um, like lard is well, it's hard to get high quality lard, but it's also like less saturated, so it has a lower smoke point. Uh, like coconut oil tastes like coconuts and it's not nutrient dense. You
Mhm.
can't fry stuff in olive oil. Avocado oil is all fake. Like 80% of the stuff you can buy on the shelves is like avocado oil that's like been laced with some other seed oils, whether they tell you or not. It's been laced. So yeah, that really is tallow, and here we are.
Yeah, so no, I mean it's the flavor. It's really it's interesting. Like I said, it takes you off guard, but it's no, it's awesome. And
Yeah, I
I
think people aren't like used to it, but
no,
once you have like two or three of them, you're like, oh wait, how can I eat any other sort of chip?
exactly. Yeah, no, like that like it's a smoky, beefy flavor that like
Yeah,
it's kind of captivating. It's
yeah,
definitely absolutely worth trying. But no, I want to like broaden the scope now, talk a little bit more about dieting and lifestyle. And I wanted to bring up, I mean, your Twitter followers probably saw that, you were spending a good amount of time in Greece, traveling.
oh yeah,
And, that's where I trace my roots back. I still have family in Greece who I go to
nice.
visit. And whenever I'm there, like I always notice how the food culture is super different, but more generally, just like the daily life, the lifestyle there, especially on the islands, is very
Mm,
different.
for
Um,
sure.
because at least like where my family is, it's a very small remote island where people live in mountain villages, and the
Nice.
food you're
What
eating,
island?
it's Ikaria, so it's like
Oh,
by Turkey.
nice. I know this one.
Okay, yeah,
I've
so
never been. We were considering going there on our honeymoon,
yeah,
but we ended up
okay.
deciding against it because of like the extended like ferry trip that would have been required.
Oh, it's a
Um,
long one. Yeah.
so anyway, continue.
Yeah, so no, Nikari, yes, it's a blue zone. So like people
Yeah.
there live until like they're 100 or plus. But no, like especially if you're living in the mountains, the only food you're eating is from the village. So like
Mm,
if you go to a restaurant, if you go to the supermarket, you're getting goat meat from the neighbor down the road who has goats. The cheese is all local. Even like the ice cream, they use goat milk from the
that's so
neighbors
cool.
to make it.
That is
And
good.
but the food is extremely delicious because it's so fresh, because it's so local.
Right.
But also the fact that like you have a relationship with the people who are producing this food, you know them, you probably
Mhm.
trust them. And if they don't have a certain kind of food available, then you're not going to eat it because like it takes forever to get the shipments into the island.
Yeah.
So like you see how there's this lifestyle dimension to it. There's this interpersonal connection. But then the other side of it is like, you know, you have to walk a lot when you're in the villages. So there's this integrated healthy lifestyle, not only with the food, but with exercise, with how you move your body.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I'm first of all, like before we go into some of your thoughts about like dieting, exercise, and all that, like I don't know, I'm curious some of the things that you picked up on while you were traveling. Like what did you notice
Yeah.
about the food culture, the lifestyle there?
Yeah. Okay, so where we went to Athens for 2 days, and then we went to Sifnos, which is an island in the Cyclades. You probably say it better than I can. Um,
Listen,
and that was very interesting because I was actually sort of like surprised at how much bad quality food was available.
really? Okay.
Yeah. So Ikaria is a bit more remote and a bit
Yes.
less developed, and it's less touristy and all the stuff. So I have some friends from college. One of them was a Greek. I don't know if he was from Ikaria, but he would always go there with my Romanian friends for
Mm.
like summer. And he's like, "Oh, we'll just eat goat. I don't eat meat in America. I'll just eat I'll just eat goat when I'm home, but your meat sucks." And like he refused to eat like meat over here, which I respect very, it sounds amazing. So I think there's a large variance. But one of the things that I realized after a bit was I saw in the grocery store on the island, like the seed oil section, like the shelf with the seed oils was like a larger section than the shelf with the olive oil.
Mm.
And I was like, dude, what the hell? I'm in Greece. Like, I want my money back. But what I realized is that the actual people who live there, they don't buy seed oils, they don't buy olive oil because their all like their oil comes from like the olive trees in their backyard. Like
Mhm.
everyone's got olive trees who actually lives there. And so there's definitely this element. We also did this thing where like we made cheese with some woman who has goats and she makes like cheese every day. And
Mhm.
so she doesn't even sell her cheese. It's not available in the little tiny supermarket. This is like
Yeah.
a small island. She just like sells it to her neighbors like under the table or whatever. So if you're a local there, I think you sort of have access to this like food system that me as a tourist or like I as a tourist did not have. Your cheese from your neighbor, your olive oil from your neighbor. I'm sure they buy eggs. Like everyone's got tomatoes. Like there's figs growing just like on the side of the road. There's like lemon trees. There's just an abundance of stuff just like that's just there. Um, so that's not something like you can really find anywhere in the US, which is good. It's very encouraging. Obviously, I did not enjoy the fact that the seed oil section of the grocery store was larger. But also islands that so we also went to this farm while we were there. It's this guy who's like very passionate about maintaining his like grandpa's farm, and they make like Sifnian cuisine like from the island, whatever. And he was talking about how certain crops like they used to produce, I don't know, 40,000 pounds a year on the island, and now they produce like five. Like
Wow.
they just make less of their own local food.
Mhm.
um and I don't know about enough about the economics and politics of like Greece to figure out like what's actually going on. I have like some guesses about what's going on, but yeah, that was like disconcerting to hear. But I think they get a lot more tourists and there's a lot fewer people that just like live there. So there's just a high degree of variance. But yeah, that was interesting. Although the food that we did eat that was like from there was absolutely incredible. Like we went to this
Yeah.
one restaurant and the olive oil was like from the lady's backyard who owns the restaurant. That was the olive oil.
Yeah.
And it's like that's so cool.
Yeah, no, that's I mean that's super common there. But Yeah, no, but I think like this all goes to show how there's such an integrated lifestyle surrounding food.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like the fact that even when you go to a restaurant, they don't have a notion of customer service like we do here. Like they're not
Right.
rushing you in and out. They're also not being fake nice to you to try to appease you. Like
Yeah.
it's just super natural, like
Yes.
they treat you like a person. They take their time, nobody's rushing.
Yeah.
And obviously, like on a physical level, like that's better for digestion.
Yeah.
Um,
Walking after meals, better for
exactly.
digestion.
And the
Yeah.
fact that there's this very clear social dimension to the way they consume food. Like it's
Yeah.
not, eating on the run. Like you're supposed to take your time and enjoy the experience. Like,
Yeah. There's
and
no
this,
like lunch at your desk in the
no,
skyscraper and this
no.
like while over you're getting crumbs on your keyboard. Um, yeah, it's a lot of it's more than just the food, certainly. And so it's very easy for people in the US to like compartmentalize, be like, oh, I gotta optimize food, gotta optimize this, gotta optimize that. And
Mhm.
it's like, well, people over there don't even think about any of this. They just like live.
Yeah,
Like, in your I remember seeing some article or Twitter thread or something about like this woman who was Italian, just like basically like what the hell, Americans? Like you have to pencil in your calendar your time for physical activity. So you like drive to the place where you're gonna do your
yeah,
physical activity,
yeah.
and then you like have to drive to the place where you get your organic food and whatever, and then you go drive to your therapist where you're gonna have social interaction and someone who care like pretends to care about you and like I forget the theme was basically like America has turned like all of natural existence into a suite of products and services for you to
Yeah,
buy,
yeah.
which is like very different. And even if you like biohack and plant like life hack your way and do this all right, you're still missing out on the whole like integrated element of this, where like your social interaction and your like emotional connection is while you're eating, and it's
Mhm.
like your sustainability. Like people care about sustainability, and they're gonna like go to their donate to their nonprofits or do their whole protests or whatever. When like they're importing food from like halfway across the world in like giant boats and whatever plastic packaging. Meanwhile, no one over there even like knows about sustainability or is like going to say anything or cares, but like they actually live in a way that's like sustainable. It's like they don't have to turn all of life into like an identity or like a service or a product to like consume.
Yeah, and I mean the fact that so much of what we consume is artificially produced, like it's deeply symbolic of like the artifice that we exalt in our culture, like the disintegration of the culture,
Yeah.
And like it goes back to what you're saying about just the taste of food, because like growing up, yeah, like I ate a significant amount of junk food, but my mom at a certain point started working as a health educator, and she does a lot of stuff on nutrition, and she decided like to cut out all artificial stuff, all like preservatives, high fructose. And once I kind of like got accustomed to eating natural things, I had no taste for like shitty quality food
Yeah.
anymore, artificial
Yeah.
stuff. Like not only did I not enjoy the taste, it's also that like my body reacted. So like
Mm-hmm.
now if I have something with artificial flavoring, something with MSG, like I'll get sick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it goes back to this point though that like food should taste good. Like we shouldn't aspire to eat fake ingredients because
Yeah.
it's not made to be eaten. And
Yeah.
it's like where's this aesthetic dimension of the eating experience, again, the social, the spiritual experience behind it all? um I don't know. So I just like it's interesting to see though, like once you get a taste for better quality stuff, like then you really start to see through, you
Yeah.
know like I
Well, I
remember
think so.
just
So there's
yeah,
this. Okay, you mentioned like the artifice of like American life in
yeah.
general, which I think, yeah, this is really where the key is. And this is why this stuff is like so interesting. It's not just like a diet trend or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, one way to think about this is that like artifice as mimicry, or
Mhm.
mockery, even. So I remember I went to Vegas. I don't know, 5 years ago. I hated it. It was like the worst place. But I remember like walking around the Venetian, like the hotel with like the indoor like pretend canals and like their fake like Italian font and like
Yeah.
plaster drywall like fake marble carving columns or whatever. And it's just like it's trying to mimic Venice, but in so doing, it's like almost mocking the very thing that is like underlying it. And so if you are someone who values the sort of like, I don't know, maybe your Renaissance European city or real food or natural food or whatever it is, the human experience as such, all this fake stuff is like not only deficient, and
Mhm.
like, a distraction. It's like a literal mockery of the real thing. Like Doritos nacho cheese. That's like a mockery of cheese.
Exactly.
It's
No,
like making fun of cheese.
that's
Um,
exactly what I was gonna say though, because like when I was little, I could eat a whole bag because
yeah,
it hits the bliss point, as they say. But
yeah.
now, like I don't even want to touch them because it's like you can taste how nasty it is.
I mean, real food also hits the bliss point. It's like, but
Yeah,
people don't even realize it
a
because they
different
never even
one. Yeah,
encountered it. It's like we're working on a spicy flavor right now, and it's got like a similar flavor profile to like your, Dorito style thing, and it's like freaking delicious. And everything is like made with a spice that is like grown by some dude in like Vietnam or whatever. It's like the highest of the highest quality spices you can imagine. Um, and it tastes amazing. It's not like you need like people thought that like you need all this artificial stuff to make food that's appealing, but like no, no one was making an alternative, so people just assumed that that was the only thing that you could put into food to get people to eat it. Um, but
yeah,
like the mockery or the mimicry is never as good as the real thing. And when people experience the real thing, they never want to go back. It's sort of like it's kind of like the Matrix thing, right? Once you or like the Plato's cave is probably a better metaphor. Like once you leave the cave, you don't want to go back.
exactly, exactly.
Um, so yeah, I think this is actually goes back into the story of how I sort of started the chips like in the first place. Um, my friend was like eating Tostitos or whatever,
Yeah.
and I was like making fun of him, and he's like, "Well, dude, it tastes good. Like, what do you want from me? It's like junk food tastes good. Like, it is what it is." And I'm like, "Dude, Tostitos or whatever junk food, it's not bad for you because it has to be. It's not inherently bad for you. Like it just so happens that that example of it is bad for you, as are all the other extant examples of this style of food are bad for you.
Mhm.
But like the form of that food, like the platonic form, whatever, of that food need not be bad for you. Everyone else is just like shitty at approximating the form.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing that I like. I love sweets. Like I love
Mhm.
junk food, but like I want if I'm gonna eat a cookie or if I'm gonna eat cake, like I want it to be made with really good quality ingredients. Because like
Yeah.
if I'm gonna eat something high calorie or high in sugar, it
Mhm.
should be the calories should be worth it. Like I don't want
Right.
fake artificial shit, you know?
And I think this is like where there's an interesting sort of cultural like change in regard to health. Um, That's very cool. Which so it kind of goes back to what you said previously about like health being weird. Like no one wants to be at the party with your like health chips. You get eye rolls, whatever. Oh, I'm on a diet. Like there's a sort of I guess this is kind of like the contemporary version of like the sort of Puritan versus libertine thing,
Yeah.
right? The Puritans are like, oh, I have to count my calories. I can't eat that. It's enjoyable. I'm gonna go in my ice plunge and do all these like things and like take my cold showers and wake up at 4 a.m. And then the libertine is like, no, I want to go out and like enjoy my life and then eat my cheap meals and whatever. Um, so there's this sort of like dichotomy, which I think is solved in the classic, maybe idealized, but is what it is, like conception of like a European, particularly like the
Yeah.
Mediterranean culture that like everyone
That's
thinks
exactly what
about.
I was gonna say. Yeah.
Like in the same way that the Puritans in America are like religiously are way more Puritan than the religious conservatives of Europe. And also the
Yeah.
libertines of America are way more libertine than like the libertines of Europe. Europe is like culturally, and maybe not today, and stereotypes and whatever, blah blah. But yeah, like they are the sort of middle ground here. Like you can have a nude beach in Europe without like conservatives freaking out or people turning it into this
Yeah.
like orgy, right? That's like something that can happen in Europe.
Yeah,
Um,
and it goes back to what you're saying though about the Platonic forms, because like the culture in the Mediterranean maintains this unity between like the aesthetic and the ontological, the
yeah,
metaphysical ideal. So that's why for
yeah,
them religiosity is very much rooted in reality. Like it's not this puritanical or this extreme libertine. Like it's I don't know, there's definitely that strong Platonic dimension. And that's why like when we hear about these fad diets today, it's always disconnected from the
mhm,
human experience. Like it's
yeah,
never part of like having an integrated lifestyle again with the aesthetic, the social, the spiritual dimension.
yeah.
And that's why I don't know, like these fad diets don't last because they're so like
And the
fragile.
funny thing is, like the Europeans, like despite America's obsession with health, the Europeans continually outperform us on life expectancy, like cancer rates and whatever. Like they're just healthier and they're not even trying. Yeah, and what you said exactly, the connection between some, if you're I guess if you're like a scholastic philosopher, maybe you'd call it the substance and the essence
Mhm.
of a thing. So why does everyone like this whole European aesthetic anyway? Why does Olive Garden have these like fake little terracotta or tile roofs? Like why does the Venetian in Las Vegas exist like the way it does? Um, America is all about the sort of substance of things. Like we're like the mimicry again. Like we're gonna make it look like this thing that everyone knows and likes, but they're not going to actually do the work required to get the thing that everyone knows and likes.
Exactly.
Like you don't get the beautiful buildings of Europe without like some reason behind it. You don't get to like make it out of like wood and plaster, right? It has to actually like spring from somewhere deeper. And I think the same thing is true about health and beauty. Um, Americans are obsessed with beauty, but also like the least healthy people imaginable. And it's like it's just complete disregard for the reality of where beauty comes from. Like, even if you don't want to get all metaphysical or spiritual about it, like we evolved to detect beauty because it signifies like healthy offspring and a mate or whatever. And so, but the point is like it's not the beauty that matters, it's the health that matters. And beauty is just how we can visually identify it. And so trying to induce beauty without seeking recourse to health is insane. And it makes sense that in such a culture that we have today, like American contemporary people like glorify ugliness because the health is so far removed from them that they can't even like contemplate it. That the only thing left for them to do is to like value the sort of ugliness, which
Yeah,
you
and
see all over the
that's,
place.
but it's the same thing what you were saying though about like the libertine and the puritanical extreme. Like you have people who are like body positivity, all bodies are
Yeah.
beautiful, which is not true. Like not all bodies are beautiful. But also then you have these like extreme health junkies or people who just get plastic surgery who are
Yeah. Yeah.
obsessed with their appearance. And it's like, okay, but where is this like grounded, rooted kind
Yeah, they're
of
starving themselves.
tradition?
They're taking Ozempic. They're throwing up. I saw apparently some lady like had such violent like vomiting from Ozempic that she like threw up her own teeth. Like her tooth fell out. It's like that's beauty. Like that's not beauty. That's disgusting.
Yeah, but it's also again like there's this broader cosmic sense of beauty that like I don't know if you're let's say you're not naturally like a super fit or skinny person like one it's possible to like even if you're larger whatever to live a healthy lifestyle
Yeah.
and to present yourself in a decent way but also like that drive for beauty can be I don't know channeled in this artistic or spiritual dimension and that's why again like within the Mediterranean even if you're not necessarily a really hot person
Mhm.
you can appreciate the beauty within the architecture the art the churches whatever like there's this broader like you're integrated into this broader sense of beauty and it's not all about like oh I have to look really good like no not everyone's going to look amazing but
Like even if you do, like you're gonna get old, right?
yeah
Like you could be the hottest person ever, and you're gonna get old one day, and then on the surface level you won't look the same way. So by ignoring that fundamental like root of this, we actually do disservice to the whole concept in general, right? So people will often say like, oh hey, we it's not good to like only value looks because it's superficial and blah blah blah. But like if you actually understand where it's coming from, you can look at like an old person, a woman or a man or whatever. You can look at them and like they have gray hair, they have wrinkles, but you can still like recognize the dignity in that
yeah
person because
exactly
like they've lived like a virtuous and healthy life and they'll look like it, even though they aren't going to be on a runway,
yeah
giving
but that's
a
like
fashion
this is
show.
what happens when you reduce beauty to hotness because like
Yeah.
part of being beautiful is like having a personality, like walking a certain way, carrying yourself a certain way. And it's like the fact that we reduce it to hotness is a sign of how like unimaginative we are as a culture.
Yeah.
Like because
Yeah.
you
They're
can
just
you
not, we're
may
just
not
not deep
be
people. They're not like thinking that far into things.
yeah. No,
Like
but yeah, go ahead.
where does it come from, right? And this inability to see deeper shows itself up in just like our whole attitude toward disease, like cancer. Cut it
Mhm.
out. you know oh, okay, like fever, take a Tylenol to lower the fever.
Yeah.
Like no one's asking where did it come from, why
Mhm.
is there cancer, why is there fever, why is there whatever. And so you end up with the medical system itself that doesn't actually like fix anything because it's incapable of even asking the question that could get you to that could even get you to the cause of the thing in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm wondering, could you said a little bit about I don't know, like how people drive to go to the gym to stay healthy. I mean,
Yeah.
it's again, it's an oxymoron, but I don't know. I'm curious to hear like what other thoughts you have about like workout trends, exercising fads. Like what do you
Yeah.
see in that kind of culture?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the workout style that I personally do um is very sort of hipster. It's been around for a while, but like no one knows about it yet. But the idea is that like our bodies design our evolved design, whatever you want, for a certain set of functions. Namely, the things that make us human structurally are kind of standing on 2 feet, walking on 2 feet, and running, and throwing. Like if you read the Iliad, which people love reading these days, which is cool. Like people are always like, the primary weapons are not like swords. It's like throwing spears and even throwing rocks and like crushing people's heads. It's like, oh, he threw the rock, and it was like, whatever. Um, Throwing is what sets us apart. And it's like there's a little metaphysical meaning in there too, which is like humans are basically the only animal that can project force at a distance from themselves. No other animal can really do that. Like a snake can be over here and then bite you over there, but the snake has to move from here to there in order to do the biting.
Yeah.
Whereas I can throw a rock at someone's head outside the fields of Troy and kill them without having to go close to them. And moreover, I can shoot them with a gun. And then nowadays we have intercontinental ballistic missiles, and like we can project force at a distance, which is cool. Anyway, but the point is, biomechanically, those are the sort of things we can do: stand, walk, run, and throw. Um, and all of those things are like pretty complicated movements that require the entire body operating at once, that most modern workout methods do not account for. So people who work out a lot, especially like things like CrossFit, very intense. Like I remember, well, I used to do CrossFit, and I like went to go see my chiropractor, and I told him I was like doing CrossFit, and he was like, oh yeah, not surprised. Like CrossFit's like, half my patients are doing CrossFit. It's like, it's good for business. And it's like, he's always treating people for these injuries and stuff. Um, and I think that's also reflective of like people not moving in a way that they were evolved to do. So for example, throwing requires the twisting of the entire body. Your feet are staggered, your arm starts back here, and then you throw, and then your arm's all the way over there. It's like very asymmetrical in like a front to back or left to right sort of sense. But if you think about the workouts that most people do, it's very symmetrical: up, down, forward, back, left, right, bench press, deadlift, squat. Um, that type of stuff is all very symmetrical, and it ignores the fact that like our entire body is like rotational. Walking, throwing, all of these things rotational. So anyway, I think people don't really know that much about, like, people are pretty solid on food. Like, we know how to eat, more or less.
Yeah.
Obviously, people, like, not everyone knows this, but it's generally accepted that, like, yeah, natural foods, eat like your ancestors, no pesticides, no artificial whatevers, blah 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 blah. And if you don't do it, maybe it's because it's inconvenient or expensive, but at least like you probably know that that's right. But as far as exercising is concerned, people don't really know about like how their body is evolved and designed to move, and they're not really working out with respect to that. And so you get a lot of injuries from people who are really intense, workout or exercisers. And that's it's a shame, but it's
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah. And I'm also interested to hear your thoughts about intermittent fasting. Do you think there's any merit behind that kind of
Yeah.
practice?
I mean, yeah. So in the short term, I mean, people do this thing where they're like, "Oh, I changed the way I ate, or I changed whatever, and I felt great." But like the starting phase of a thing need not be the same as the middle and end phase of a thing. But
Hmm.
because they felt great during the starting phase of a thing, they never like sort of check back in on themselves to see if like that benefit is continuing. And if anything, their like sort of sense of bias like develops around defending that thing,
Yeah.
because they did a thing and they're like, and they told their friends about it, and like, I feel amazing and blah blah. And then it's hard for them to admit this is the classic like vegan syndrome,
Yeah.
like late stage veganism. It's like they go become vegan, and their body's like, oh, this is cool, I'm not eating junk food anymore, I feel good. And then 5 years later they've aged, and now they like look like they're 50.
Yeah.
um so intermittent fasting, I think, is like somewhat similar, uh over like sporadically over short periods of time. um like, yeah, sure, it makes sense, it's like pretty consistent with how we evolved and this and that. However, uh if you think about on a deeper level what fasting means, it's telling your body that, like, hey, it's not like we don't have enough food available to us. Like, the world is unsafe. And whether it's a
Hmm.
famine or a drought, or our crops are burned down by some marauding Vikings or whatever it is, like, the world is unsafe. And I don't know when I'm going to get my next meal. So yeah, in the short term, it does do things like increase your like brain's acuity so you can go out and hunt more food. Sure. And then ideally in an evolutionary setting, you would go out and hunt and eat, and then you'd be fine. But over the long term, it continually trains your body to think that, like, hey, we are always out of food, like we are always starving. And so that means when you do get food, you end up accumulating more of it and storing more of it, because your body's like, hey, I'm not going to burn all this right now. I don't know what I'm going to eat again next, I better save on to this. And so that's where you get the sort of people who, and this is very common, you get the whole plateau thing. Like people do CrossFit, they'll intermittent fast, they'll do a keto. This is like those kind of things all go hand in hand in the modern day, and they'll feel good, whatever. And then a few months later, they'll start to plateau, and they're plateauing because their body's like stopped burning energy because it's like
Mm,
so concerned about the future of your ability to provide for itself, and their metabolism just like gets sunk, and it's very hard to like recover from that. And it's in response to this the whole repeat bro thing has sort of like emerged in popularity. Um, yeah,
mm. What do you say about the vegan stuff?
I mean, there's just there's just no like historical anthropological precedent for like healthy humans having ever been vegan.
Yeah.
Like the only people that are vegan in history are like particularly basically like monastics of like certain religions, notably like Hinduism and Christianity. Um, but if you ask them like at face value, like, hey, why are you doing this? None of them are going to say it's for health.
Yeah.
Like that's not a goal that they have, which is fine. And they're allowed to have that goal and they know what they're doing. And they're not trying to convince other people to do the same thing as them. Um,
Mhm.
but like the vegan health argument is just it's completely insane because
Yeah.
there's no healthy culture, group, people, ethnicity, whatever you want, tribe of people that have ever existed that are vegan.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you bring up the monastic example because, like, even for them with fasting, there's always some deeper logic behind it because, I mean, sure, there's like the biological dimension of it that you mentioned, but I don't know. In most religions, fasting is this like this spiritual training to understand like there are periods of like sacrifice of asceticism and then there are periods of feasting, which is I don't know, like this is how life is. We suffer and we
Yeah.
have joy, you know, and it's you see how like there's this very human, this larger cosmic dimension to fasting that makes a lot of sense. But the reason I brought it up is like I tried it and I noticed that like it made me think about my time living in Europe because for them, like, okay, breakfast is tiny. You have coffee, a cigarette, of course, and then, you know, a cookie or toast or something. Lunch is the big one. Like most people are able to like leave work in the middle of the day, have a big lunch with their family, take a nap, do some more work, and then
Mhm.
something small for dinner, fruit, whatever. And I noticed while like doing the fasting, I don't know, it wasn't so much like the time window, but it was like limiting how much I was eating at each meal. Cause like I don't know,
Well, I
have
mean, this the snacking thing that is a big thing. So, like,
yeah,
to be fair, when I talk about intermittent fasting, I'm like eating less than 3 meals a day. In my view, is intermittent fasting. But for a lot of people, it literally means just like, oh yeah, I should eat 3 meals a day and not snack. But like for most Americans, that's like a foreign concept. So I was never a big snacker, like as in eating between meals. So to be fair, like I don't really empathize that very well. So yeah, 3 meals is great. Snacking not so hot. Um, but the other thing that I forgot to mention about the fasting issue is that like the punchline is fasting is stressful. A lot of things are stressful. I'm
yeah,
not like a repeat whatever where I'm going to say you should not have any stress. Like that's like your life exists. However, um, you should be well apprised of all the sources of stress in your life when playing around with this kind of thing. So if you are in eating a small breakfast and like doing what you just said in Europe, first of all, I mean you're still eating in the morning, it's small, so like that's good. But also your job is not stressful. Your finances aren't stressful.
yeah,
Your social relationships aren't as stressful. You're probably exposed to like a lot fewer just pollutants in general. There's no fluoride in your water in Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you stack on all these things, then you start to realize that like it gets a little bit more complicated. So now take the version of like you in America. You're on a subway, people are like screaming at you. There's like a hustle and bustle of a city. You're up in an elevator at an office building, like you're working 80 hours a week because you like live in New York and like life's intense and all the like all this stuff. Then your body's gonna respond differently to that same way of like eating, for example.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, and this goes back to what you're saying about in Greece. It's not just about the food; it's about the whole shebang, the whole kit and caboodle, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there, I mean, this is like the bigger picture question I want to ask though, because sure, in Greece, it's fairly easy to live that kind of lifestyle. Like you don't have
Yeah.
to pay a bunch of money to get good quality food because your neighbor's growing it in their backyard. But for those of us in the US, especially if you're in a city, the options are more limited. Like if I don't have a lot of money and I have to spend a lot of my day working, it's much easier and cheaper to get fast food or to go
Mhm.
to a supermarket that has shitty quality ingredients on
Yeah.
sale. And if I have a lot of money, then sure, I could go to Whole Foods and get organic stuff. But I don't know. Like, so what would you say about like the social or the economic realities that we have
Yeah.
to deal with in this country? Like for people who don't have as many resources, like
Yeah.
what can you actually do?
Yeah. It's definitely tough. I have broken down a sort of budget about this on my Substack a while back, and I realized it's not actually that expensive, but with the caveat that you don't have kids. Like when you start introducing kids, then the game changes a little bit. So for example, I'm pretty sure that I eat about $600 to $700 worth of food a month. Um, and this is all food, because I don't really go out to eat. So if you think about living in the city, one night at a restaurant is a tenth of that or more. Um, so that's like if you were to cook everything you ate and like ate at home with homemade ingredients or whatever, um, you could it would be cheaper than how most I'm imagining like I'm not a girl, so I don't know how girls live in the city, but imagining how most dudes in the city like live, like going out to eat with their friends, dates, whatever. Um, it would be cheaper if you were to just like even buy high quality ingredients and cook it all yourself and eat it at home. Like that would be cheaper. However, then you're like, okay, I don't have the time because I have a job and blah blah blah. Honestly, I haven't. You could crunch the numbers yourself, but I'm sure there's someone you could pay like $20 an hour to come to your house and like cook you meals and stick them in the freezer once a week and like with pay them 4 hours, 4 hours a week, $80 a week, $160 a month, and then they meal prep for you. And that's like on top of the ingredient costs. I'm sure that would still be cheaper than if you were to go out to eat at New York City restaurants all the time. Um, but I mean, you want to go to restaurants and like this is the whole thing. It's like people have to decide for themselves like where their priorities lie. Like for me, I care a lot about this. So I don't live in Manhattan. I live in New Jersey, which is good because I also like am close to the Moss factory and I'm close to my parents. And I'm also married, so I don't need to like be out running around like socializing in New York all the time. So like that's super good for me. And because I have the priorities I have, I like try to structure my life in a way that enabled me to go do all this stuff. And as far as money is concerned, like, yeah, my wife doesn't work. Well, I mean, so she has like a small Instagram account and she like does that kind of thing. So a little bit of money, but she doesn't really work. But she does a lot of stuff at home. And so that allows us to like collectively live in a way that's like much better than either of us could have done on our own. Because if she were out on her own, she'd be struggling to make enough money to like buy her healthy food. Um, and she'd be stressed out all the time. And then she would have no time to cook it. And then if I lived alone, I might have enough money to buy all the healthy food, but then I'd be stressed out because I have to cook it. And then I'd be like alone and miserable. And we'd have two sets of apartments. So it's like, it comes up this whole discussion of like how people live. They're single with their own apartments. Do you live with your parents? Do you live with your wife? Do you live with your girlfriend? Do you live with your boyfriend? Like it brings into this whole discussion. And I actually think people could do a lot better financially than they think. However, they can't have their cake and eat it too. That's kind of the punchline. Like you can't if you're operating on a finite budget, if this question means something to you, and I'm sure some people that are unaffected by this question, but most people are. Um, if like the budget is the thing that matters to you, like you can't have everything. You can't have your healthy, good, delicious food and go out to eat at a restaurant. Because even if you do go out to eat at a restaurant, you have to eat at an expensive restaurant because shitty, like cheap restaurants have terrible food. Um, so this is where it all comes down to priorities. And there's a lot of tricks you can do. Like I can name a whole bunch of farms that will like have pretty decently priced, like especially for the quality food that like will deliver to people in New York, and you can get raw milk and all these things. You could, try to mess around with personal chefs and private chefs and whatever. And so there are like tricks you can do, but at the end of the day, it's like it comes down to how you want to live your life. And I want to live my life in the way that I do, so I do.
Yeah.
And not everyone will, and so they don't. From like a business standpoint and like a cultural standpoint, my goal is to make it easier for people who are not as extreme as I am to like live their lives in a way that are that's healthier. So instead of going to the bodega and you have like junk food that's like gross, you have ancient crunch snacks that like won't poison you. That kind of thing. That's my goal.
Okay. So one last question before we wrap up. Um, Tanning, since you
Yeah.
know you're known on Twitter for it. What do you have to say about sunscreen? Very interested in this topic.
I mean, dude, sunscreen is like poisonous. Like every sunscreen is toxic. Like
It's also
uh,
gross to put on your body.
and it smells disgusting. It
Yeah.
kills the fish. Like it gets all over your clothes, the water, like go to a pool where people are wearing sunscreen. There's like this film of like disgusting carcinogenic grease on top. Like, ew, like you're gross. Like stop. Like seriously. If you want shade, and I'm not saying you have to burn or like, even tan for 8 hours a day if you go to the beach. Like if you want shade, put on clothes, bring an umbrella, like sit under a palm tree. You know, it's not that hard. Wear a hat. Like it's really not that difficult. Even if I didn't want to get as much sun exposure as I personally do, there's plenty of things that I could do to still not wear sunscreen and like not get exposed to the sun. I would just wear, head to toe white linen and like a big, safari hat, and just like hang out. But yeah, sunscreen is disgusting.
Yeah.
Like
I'm happy
I don't know
finally
what's worse.
someone else is saying this. Yeah, because I
Huh?
always, I'm happy someone else is finally saying this because I
Yeah.
always like go on tirades against sunscreen. Because
Yeah,
it
it's like
goes back to
you're
what
a
you were saying
fat.
about food though. Like it's gross. Like why would you want a gross thing on your
Yeah,
body or in
you're
your?
a fat, like gross, seed oil swilling, like diet coke drinking, like obese American. Like that's what you are if you're putting on sunscreen. Like that's what you appear like. It's just like it's not good. It's not good.
No. So
It's
yeah,
really
it
not.
all comes down to a very simple point. Like we just should put good things,
Yeah,
pleasant things in our body. Like it's not much more complicated than that.
yeah,
Yeah. So all right. So Steven, what plugs do you have for our listeners? What do you want to tell them about?
sure. Yeah, you can learn more in depth about all the stuff we just talked about if you subscribe to my Substack, which is reallytanman.substack.com. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at reallytanman, and you can check out Masa Chips at masachips, masachips.com.
Awesome. Well, Steven, thanks so
Yeah,
much for coming on.
cool. Thanks, Steven. Great to be here.